Hello, podcast family, and welcome to Regulation Revolution, where we are igniting a revolution to help the world effectively manage and respond to their emotional experiences. It's not about what happens to us, but how we react that creates harmony or chaos in our lives. Emotional regulation is a complex process involving many factors. We offer this podcast to provide insight for you about how you fine-tune and powerfully decide to transform your complex emotional states into empowered instances of self-mastery, peace, and increased awareness. Instead of having your emotions control you, you can learn to have control over your emotions. The following program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. For more information, visit us at regulationrevolution.com. Welcome to today's episode of Regulation Revolution with your co-hosts Amy Reamer and Barry Vassar, Heart and Mind. Amy is a licensed therapist, professional speaker, and teacher. Barry is a pre-licensed therapist and practice manager at Heart and Mind. To find out more about Heart and Mind, please visit heartmindrba.com. Welcome once again, podcast family, to Regulation Revolution. This is Barry Vassar. I'm here with Amy Reamer. Hello, Amy.
Hey, how's it going?
Today, folks, I'm living the good life. I'm still reeling over our processing of the tiger and the owl and the hippo. For our listeners and viewers, we've covered the tiger. It's got its own episode out there. And today we are talking about the owl, the logical brain, the upper brain, the processing brain, all of that, smart brain. So, Amy, tell me something about the owl. Is that part of me that doesn't always make sense when I get all upset my tiger's out?
Yeah, definitely. The owl definitely has lots of different AKAs, right? Like a cortex, the prefrontal cortex, thinking brain, upstairs brain. Just depends on who you're talking to as to sort of like how they refer to it. But I usually refer to it as the owl. Like you said, sometimes if that tiger comes out really roaring, then that owl sort of has flown away. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that owl, and learn about the owl a little bit more beyond just what it does. Because it could help people to understand what's going on for them or for their loved one, and when the owl is out versus when it's not, or when the owl is present and when it's not. I've got, for those on video, I've got my little owl puppet. So he usually introduces himself. I like his little vest. He's so sharp in class.
Yeah. One of the great things you taught me about the owl, that I had never paid attention to before, but now I can't help but see it, is the language processing piece of things. Like when I'm talking to somebody and they're upset about something, not hysterical, but they might be grieving something, they're in their feelings. I've now started to notice how many people say, I just can't find the right word. I just can't, I'm wording this wrong. And ever since you pointed out that part of the owl's job is your language and your language processing, when you're in that feeling brain and that owl flies off, you can't find the words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why the title for today is Owl Holds Our Words. And so that's a huge part of the job of the cortex. And so because when we are babies, we have a baby owl. And then as we're growing, that owl is growing and it's learning and developing. Obviously, this is why babies don't have language when they're born. They have ways to communicate, but they don't communicate with English language, verbal words, or any language with words. And then the owl doesn't finish growing until we're like mid-20s to 30. Some people a little sooner, some people a little later, just depending. But so when we as adults are talking to, especially to children, we have adult owls and they have baby owls. And we have a lot of times an expectation that their owl is the same as ours, that it knows all these words and understands things. Um, like that terminology that sometimes parents like to use with kids, use your words. That one bothers me sometimes. If the owl is present, they certainly can use their words. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible for them to do it. But if they're in a meltdown, if they're like you said, in their feelings, right? They're in that tiger space, the owl is not present. And so you're frustrating them because the owl isn't there. And tigers don't use words. So tigers like, get away from me. Don't ask me questions. Don't like expect me to use words. And I think most adults can understand this because like, have you ever been like really angry with somebody and you just can't get the words out? Like you can't think what you want to say to them. And then, or like, let's say somebody cuts you off in traffic or something and they really tick you off and you're like, oh, and then later you come up with the best comeback.
Right.
Like, this is what I should have said to that jerk in the grocery store, like, or whatever, right? It's all because you went into kind of tiger mode in the moment and you were kind of in that feelings place and you couldn't necessarily think of the best jab to come back at. But then later when you calm down or you were in another space, maybe you're telling somebody the story and you're back into that left brain, you're back into that owl brain. That's another one for the owl, left brain. That's another term. But when you're back in that, then you can think of those things. So think about that the next time you have a child who's in the middle of having a tantrum or a meltdown, or maybe their pet died and they're like inconsolably crying or something like that. Don't ask them a bunch of questions. Don't tell them to use their words if they're in that space, because what you're doing is you're speaking Swahili and they only understand French. And so they're not going to understand you. It's going to be confusing. Have you ever been in a foreign country where they didn't speak the same language as you, and you can communicate and you can kind of figure things out a lot of times, but it's frustrating, it's hard, trying to get your message across or get your question answered. That's what you're dealing with when you're in owl mode and they're in tiger mode.
Well, I will tell parents quite often that they are right and they are wrong at the same time, in that little Billy, Susie, whoever does something and they look at their child and they say, why'd you do it? And the child says, I don't know. They're like, you do know. They're like, I don't know. It's like, you do know. And I'm like, you're right. They do know, but they can't think of it right now. They can't process it right now. And if you think about that, not to harp on the tiger, we're really focusing on the owl for this episode. But when you think about it, the kid cut in front of you and jumped on the swing. You went over and pushed the kid off the swing because you were there first. Well, that's a survival, a fight or flight, a tiger coming out. You walk over to the kid and start fussing at him. Why'd you push him off the swing? He might not be able to find the words, but he knows the reason. So if you can just sit through the moment with the child, and this goes to adults. I tell adults, I tell couples, when you're looking at your partner, and your partner you can visibly see that their words are gone. Like they've gone into storming out the room. They've gone into slamming their fist down. They've gone into just going, stop trying to reason with them. The train has left the station. The owl that's flown off. And when you say, what were you thinking? Just like that child, they're like, I don't know what I was thinking. Okay. I don't know. A few hours later, tiger goes away, owl comes back, all of that processing comes back, and now I can talk about it. But it's such a big component of it with what the owl does. It's not just the being able to reasonably come up with a logical conclusion. It's actually affecting our executive functioning.
Yeah. Well, that's another piece of the owl, not just words, but like you said, problem solving. If you try to get someone to solve a problem when they're in the middle of their feelings and they're really shut down, I mean, think about it. I think about like grief, right? When we lose a loved one, and that's another example of losing your words, right? If you have grief, people are speechless often, right? So, I mean, think about when 9/11 happened, and everybody's watching their TVs and everybody's usually pretty silent, because you're just sort of in shock of what's happening. And there are no words like to really describe when you have a crisis like that or you have a big loss like that. So that's what's happening. But we forget sometimes when kids are in a space like that, that they're experiencing that same thing that we've experienced, because maybe because we're not in the same crisis that they are, so it's harder to recognize it. But if you can recognize whether the owl is present or not present, it can show you the best way to approach. So people will say, well, how come sometimes I they don't do what I ask them to do until I get loud or until I get, my tone changes? Because you're speaking to the tiger at that point, and they're tuned out and they listen because the tiger came in. That doesn't necessarily mean their owl isn't there, but they're responding more to your tiger than they are to your owl. So you may have to figure out how to get their attention. But the same strategies that work for a kid when their owl is present aren't going to work when the owl isn't present. And so we have to become more aware of what that looks like for our child when they're present or not.
One of the things that I coach couples on is to listen to what the feeling is or what the actual message is, and not so much the words. And a little fun thing I will do, and I don't want to offend anybody out there with this. So I'm going to pick on myself as a man. Oftentimes for a man, this is what a woman may sound like to him. And you just don't understand, because the giraffes are not eating enough grass. All the dolphins are going to die in the ocean, and the moon is lined up with Saturn right now. And I am so upset that you showed up late for dinner. All you had to do was call, but no, you couldn't cut the grass. And I don't know why you left the tank on empty. Oh, you're upset because I didn't call before dinner to let you know I was going to be running late. That's it. But I tell them that's a sign, and it goes both ways, but that's a sign that even though they're communicating, that the train has left the station. That's going to be my phrase, that you're not dealing with somebody who is reasonable right now. So that's an exaggeration, but sometimes kids come at us like that. Sometimes our partners come at us like that. And so you kind of have to maybe tune out the words a little bit, because it might sound like gibberish to you or make no sense. But what is the feeling they're expressing? Mm-hmm. You hurt me. My feelings are hurt. I got lost. I got scared. And so I have to kind of coach them, listen for what the feeling is, because I'll see so many couples and parents and children, they will get they'll get into an argument over the wording. Mm-hmm. So you said, think about a kid. A kid says, you promised something, you were going to take me for ice cream. Well, no, I never promised I was going to take you for ice cream. I said, I tried to take. No, you promised. No, I said, we try to. But you told me if I was good, we would. I said, possibly would. And they're bickering over that instead of just saying, oh, you had an expectation. Whether it was right or wrong, it doesn't make a difference. And your expectation was not met.
Right. And that language piece is an important one too, because again, that parent, if they said, we might go, we possibly will go, whatever, those are very abstract sort of terms that your child's owl may not grasp just yet. So you may have said those words, but did their owl know what those words meant? Because again, you're dealing with a baby owl or a child owl. You're not dealing with a full-grown owl, maybe with a full vocabulary that understands the nuances of that. So kids tend to want their words very sort of black and white to be able to understand, because they don't have the abstract thinking just as much, depending on the age.
So there's three pieces. And I don't want to take away from anything you have in here, but it's three pieces I'm just sort of curious about, and I think it might be helpful for our listeners. First, how to identify when the owl is not present, which we've kind of touched on that. They might not be able to communicate their words. They might communicate in such a way it doesn't make sense, or they just can't. So we kind of got that. What I'm curious about is, can you bring the owl back once it's flown off, or do you have to wait it out? Because I keep using that phrase, the train has left the station. Don't try to jump in front of it. Don't try to stop it. But Is there any technique that could be used with either the parent and child, or even with your partner? I know everybody is different. There's more of like a grounding type thing. Okay, I see the tiger's out. I see your owl is flying off. Should we try to intervene with that? And is there a way to do it? Or should we just let it run its course?
Well, it comes back into the whole purpose of our podcast around regulation. So if they need co-regulation, then you can help. You can offer safety. It's all about safety. If they're not feeling safe in their body, if they're not feeling safe emotionally, they're not feeling safe in connection to you, they might not feel safe in connection to themselves because maybe they felt stupid or thought you felt they were stupid or whatever was going on in their head.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's getting in the way.
Okay.
That's what caused the owl to fly away. So sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it's us reeling in our own tiger and settling down and showing that we're okay and that we're a safe place. But you can't necessarily rush it, and you can't necessarily force it to come back. All you can do is basically it's almost like the same. We talked about the offering the hand down the ladder, right?
Right.
You can offer to the owl to come back by saying, okay, it's safe now. I've calmed down. I'm not going to yell. We're good. That doesn't necessarily mean the owl is going to accept it and come back right away. But if you don't offer it, they're definitely not.
And if you try, and see, that's my thing, is that if you try to stop it, I think it makes it worse.
Grab an owl, you're probably going to get pecked.
Well, I talked with so many people about it, is that the only way you could bring somebody back, if there is a way to do it, is to stay at that top of the ladder that we referred to before and offer the hand down, like you said. So, for instance, you're having the moment, whatever the moment is right now. You're not a physical threat to me. You're not going to burn the house down. You're just in your feelings. And instead of leaving the room and walking away from you, or instead of trying to smack you out of it, or instead of trying to talk you down from it, I'm just going to sit here with you and have your feelings, and stay in that safe place. And I found that oftentimes will help somebody to de-escalate. But when you go after them and say, you shouldn't feel that way, stop feeling that way. I think so many times when a teenager raises their voice to an adult and the adult responds with, don't raise your voice to me, immediately their voice goes louder. Because it's like, oh, you thought that was raising my voice? And it seems like that we give it energy, I think. The tiger comes out, I think sometimes we feed the tiger, and that just keeps that owl away.
Yes. And the people's tigers often think they can scare the owl into coming back, right? Mm-hmm. You can use fear to intimidate, you're going to tell me what happened and you're going to tell me right now. Like mm-hmm. we can intimidate, or we can scare the body into responding the way we want it to respond, because that's our tiger saying, I need you to hear me. I need you to listen. The neuroscientists will tell you that the bigger the threat, the lower on the evolutionary chain we go down. So the more primitive someone's response is, the higher they're perceiving the threat. So if you've ever worked with kids with a lot of trauma and neglect, especially as young children, or maybe children who are institutionalized out of orphanages, we've had where kids pee on things in their rooms, or steal and hoard food. I had a kid that worked with that ate an entire bag of apples, vomited, and then tried to eat the vomit. So like they are in this extremely primitive caveman. I know you said lizard brain before, but like that's the very primitive. Like we have levels, we don't get into the nuances of stuff because that just gets complicated. It's much simpler to just say fire tiger, ice tiger, right? But there are nuances of that. So the more primitive behavior you're seeing out of someone, the higher they perceive the threat. Now, that might not make sense to us because if we know, like, I'm not going to hurt my kid, why in the world would they be doing this? That doesn't mean that they're responding to you as a threat. It could be in their head. It could be a memory that's I, I don't know. It's because they've had nightmares. And so like memories of abuse and neglect have come back out, into their consciousness while they're sleeping. They wake up and they're in this state of not knowing what's happening. And the body is, I mean, everybody's woke up in the middle of the night. We're confused and, where do I step? And, I mean, who goes to hotel rooms and leaves the bathroom light on because you're worried that if you wake up in the middle of the night, you won't be able to find the bathroom because it's not house, right? So everybody knows when we wake up, we're in sort of this confused state. So a lot of that happens at night. So that primitiveness is because the owl has flown even further away. So it's like the bigger the tiger has gotten, the further the owl flies away. Talking about the speech stuff. So I know a young lady who was adopted out of an orphanage, and when she would melt down, it was almost like she became an infant, laying on the ground, kicking and hitting, just like a 2-year-old toddler would hit the floor with the tantrum. But there was no consoling. If you tried to touch, she'd scream louder. If you left the room, that she would scream louder. So the parent, just figured out, really used the screams as a gauge of what feels most comfortable to her. And what ended up happening is sitting a few feet away, not talking directly to her. And the parent would actually talk to themselves to just like try to stay calm. Like, makes me so sad that you won't let me hold you. I would hold your brothers when they were little, and it's sad that you won't let me hold you because I know you're so upset. Not expecting any response, but just sort of like self-talk. And really what the parent was doing was keeping themselves regulated. Is really what it comes down to, is that they were co-regulating with themselves. They were doing that self-regulation. And because the parent was present, didn't leave, because leaving obviously was setting, like you said, walking away sometimes is a trigger for folks of being abandoned and left alone, but they don't want you to hold them or touch them either. So come too close, and that's too close. So what they did was they found a routine. And then when that child would start to come out of that state, they literally couldn't even use their words. It was like they had lost their words completely. As a 7-year-old, had a pretty good vocabulary, words and everything. And so, and then they would go cuddle on the couch together, just turn the TV on, kind of numb out with cartoons or whatever. And then probably 30 minutes or so after doing that, the owl was back. The language was back. The words were back as a 7-year-old. So, that to me is one of the most best examples of watching a child. And this is, a child that had early neglect, had early trauma. And so who knows even what who knows what the meltdown was even over, because it was likely just a feeling from before, or feeling lost, feeling lonely, who knows? But the point is, if we know the answer of why they're upset, which everybody always seems to want to know why someone's upset, but when you know why, you really can't fix it either. It really doesn't help. I'm not quite sure why our brains go there.
Well, before you jump to that third piece I wanted to ask you about, I just want to give my understanding, just a quick little review for our listeners and viewers. So 2 strong indicators of where the owl is at with an individual, or even with yourself, is language processing, whether you can find the words or not. That's a good indicator. And also the level of behavior, or from that primitive to more evolved behavior, that can give you a good, because I want our folks to know when the owl has flown off. And so this will give you some good indicators, at least those 2. And then in that second area, what I'm kind of taking away is that sometimes through co-regulation and your response to the other person, you can help to bring that owl back and take that tiger. But then in other instances, you might just have to let it run its course because it may be
Yeah,
too far gone.
you can create an environment of safety where you're not adding to the fire, right? So if you think
Right.
about adding, fuel to, you're not adding fuel to the fire, but that doesn't necessarily mean the fire is going to go out. It might be a slow burn.
Right. Okay.
But if you keep adding fuel to the fire, it's never going to go out.
All right. In that third area that I want to ask about, totally off script with you, but how do you, somebody else, how do we keep, and this is a really tricky one, how do we keep our owl present when our tiger is triggered? Because I know we have to be able to do it. I talked to an individual that said they ran across somebody who, from their past, that triggered them. They felt anxiety, they felt the anxiousness in their body, but they didn't turn and run. They walked right past them and actually nodded their head at them and kept going. So they felt the threat alarm. The tiger was coming out, but they were able to say the presence of mind that, and I'm making the rest of this up, I'm in the middle of a Walmart with hundreds of other people and security cameras. What this person did 20 years ago, they cannot do to me right now, so I am safe. Like they actually were able to process that while the whole time feeling threatened. What's a tip? Is that one way? It seemed to work for them, but that's that third piece. I feel like I'm losing my language. So how do I keep my owl present?
The ability to do that means that you have good regulation. It means that fulcrum of your teeter-totter works pretty good because that person came along from your past, smacked the teeter-totter, but yet you were able to not let it, fly up or fly down. So whatever helps you to increase your ability to regulate. That's your parasympathetic system. And so sometimes we don't have a lot of muscle with that. I would talk about it's your muscle to go up and down the ladder, right? If you don't have a lot of muscle, you end up, staying down the ladder. I can't climb back up. So you're not going to be able to avoid these things because that's going to happen, right? We're going to run into people from our past or run into jerks that say things that irritate us or set us off or whatever. But this is why people don't kill people every day, right? This is why we can, because they actually do have, and some people will talk gas pedal and the brake, but like you have some brake there. And to me, it's about the owl and the tiger communicating. What you just described is the owl and the tiger talking to each other. And the only way that you can improve that is to practice that and to figure out, how do I do that? And sometimes physiologically, it could be like we have the safe and sound protocol that helps to build up our vagus nerve in the vagal system. So it works better. There's lots of vagal exercises out there. There's different ways that you can physiologically improve that. And then there's also, I tell people you can visualize your tiger, pet it, like talk to it, say, it's okay, buddy. I've got this. We're okay. Because what's happened especially if someone has a lot of stress, trauma, things growing up, the tiger's been in charge a lot, right? We talk about tiger takes over, drives the bus. If he's done that, this owl has not had an opportunity to grow. As we know, our bodies, our brains are use dependent, right? And the more we use different features of our brains and our bodies, the better they work and they grow. Well, if the owl's been riding in the back of the bus through a lot of your childhood, it hasn't had a chance to grow, and they're not talking to each other. Tiger just said, I'm taking over and I'm running the show. Another piece to that is, and another way that you can recognize, the owl knows the difference between past, present, and future. The tiger does not. So when we talked in an episode about the tiger, we explained the tiger is only present. If you're thinking about a stressful event coming up, you got to feature something in the future, and you're feeling the anxiety of it, then the tiger thinks, oh my gosh, you're anxious. We need to do this. We need to do that. And it starts to panic. It doesn't know that. The owl is the one that will say, hey, that speech is next week. We're getting ready to go to lunch with a friend, and that's going to be fun. So you curl up and go back to sleep. I'm going to go and we'll worry about the speech later. So it's really about, how do you get them to communicate? How do you get them to talk to each other, trust each other, that kind of thing. And so if you're able to do that, just like your scenario in the Walmart, if you're able to do that, then you have a tiger and owl that are communicating well. If not, you've got a tiger that just takes over, drives the bus, and kicks the owl to the curb.
Well, I'm making a note about something. I know we're at our time in the next couple of minutes. We've kind of given broad strokes to the owl here a little bit, but yeah, I feel like our folks are able to recognize when your owl is flying off, somebody else's processing's not there. I feel like we did hit on, can you bring it back? Sometimes you can. You got to offer the safe space. Some of it's based on your regulation. And then the other piece of that is how to ground yourself, as we say in counseling sometimes, and how to be able to get those parts communicating. The note I'm making to myself is one of the things maybe we can do in a future episode. I know we're going to cover the hippocampus, and give it its own time as well. But you said something that I really feel we could all learn from, and that is, how do you get those parts talking to each other? Mm-hmm. So maybe after we do a feature on the hippocampus, on our hippo, maybe that's something we could put together for our listeners and viewers on, okay, so now we've told you about these three animals in your head. Now let's show you how to get them talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do know.
In therapy, we do it lots of different ways. So we could certainly, talk through that. Some ways that you can do in therapy. Obviously, these are things that can be done at home too. So it's not some major secret that therapists keep locked up. We can certainly talk about that.
Well, we are in our time here this week, folks. Amy, thanks again for all of your insight into this. Folks, we hope some of this helps you with your partners, with your kids with your parents. Recognize when their owl has flown off. So it can happen across the board.
Ask a kid what wakes up their parents' tiger. They can answer that immediately.
They can answer it immediately. Once again, Regulation Revolution. You can follow us on Facebook. You can join the Regulation Revolution. Be made aware of upcoming podcasts. Look out there for some of our current podcasts, get a newsletter. We really appreciate all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. And hopefully this is helping you in some way. Amy, I know I'm learning something new every single week. So thank you for bringing a lot of this to the table. I guess I'll see you in a future episode, right?
That's right. I'll see you then.
All righty. Thanks again, Amy.
Following program includes stories and situations that are not intended to identify any client or individual. Any similarities are coincidental and should not be considered reflective of any one person or group of people. The preceding program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. If you or someone you know is in need of counseling services and reside in the Commonwealth of Virginia, please visit us at heartmindrba.com for more information.